A lot of people on the right believe that Joe Biden is suffering from cognitive decline. Many on the left will say he's just an older guy who had a stuttering problem as a child, but he's not senile or suffering from dementia or anything like that. Those who believe he is suffering from some sort of cognitive decline will say clips of him forgetting what he's talking about or saying nonsensical things is solid proof that something's going on. Those who think he's just slowed down a bit due to his age will say, that's just Joe. He's always been gaffe-prone, which is true. However, I decided to figure out if there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt one way or the other, and I think there is. Joe is definitely suffering from some kind of cognitive decline, and the proof is that he himself knows it and unknowingly admits it. Quite often, I might add. How so? He always talks about getting in trouble with his staff.
I'm going to get in trouble with my staff. Yeah, go ahead, but I pretend that you didn't answer you. I'm sorry, this is the last question I'll take, and I'm really going to be in trouble.
Think about it. Being a politician means optics are the name of the game. Biden's never been a smart guy, but he was certainly smart enough to realize how bad the optics would be for a president who doesn't seem to be in charge. A president who repeatedly says he answers to his staff. And because he's willing to say that out loud, it proves that he's in pretty bad shape mentally. He's saying the things you're not supposed to say out loud. When he's told not to take any questions, he's not supposed to say that he was told not to take any questions. He's supposed to just not take any questions. He's almost like a child. And that brings us to this question. Who's really making all of his decisions? It's not Biden for sure. I mean, he's not even allowed to choose if he wants to take questions from reporters or not. When he does answer questions from the press, he often has note cards that he looks at for the answers, which means two things. He knows what the questions are ahead of time, and he's not the person actually answering those questions. He's reading someone else's answers. So who's that someone else? Well, it looks to be a guy by the name of Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff. When Biden says he's going to get in trouble, I think he's worried about him. So who is Ron Klain? He's a swamp monster for sure. He's been in Washington, D.C. since the early 80s. He's a lawyer. He's a lobbyist. He worked on both of Bill Clinton's campaigns. He was Al Gore's chief of staff and worked on his campaign. He worked on John Kerry's campaign in 2004. He helped Obama get ready for the debates in 2008. He was Vice President Biden's chief of staff in 2010 and was Obama's Ebola czar in 2014. He worked on Hillary's campaign in 2016 and Biden's in 2020. He's now the White House Chief of Staff, and it looks like he's the boss. In fact, some Republicans have been referring to Mr. Klain as the Prime Minister. The National Review reported this about his presence at the White House. White House officials who have seen their dynamics say Mr. Klain is expert at keeping discussions with Mr. Biden focused on specific actions, which is not always easy given the president's habit of verbal meanderings. Do you think those verbal meanderings are because of a childhood stutter? A typical exchange, White House officials say, is for Mr. Klain to suggest something along the lines of, "Sir, we're recommending that you make these 3 calls," unless Mr. Biden preempts him by declaring his own intent to make the same calls. The report then says that Klain is much better at keeping focused on business than Biden is. I wonder why. He presides over a series of morning meetings with top White House aides, one with the president's senior advisors, another with the extended senior staff. He sends emails in bursts with numbered bullet points and capitalization for emphasis. Colleagues describe his email voice as emphatic. He tries to be in the Oval Office at 9:30 a.m. or so when the president receives his intelligence briefings. The person running the executive branch is a swamp monster. Trump ran on draining the swamp, and Biden, who's probably the swampiest politician in history, filled the swamp back up. Ron Klain is the quintessential swamp creature. Put it this way. When the Redskins were changing their name, they should have gone with the Swamp Monsters, and then they could have used him in their logo. He's been behind the scenes in Washington for a long time, going back and forth between working privately and publicly. He was a lobbyist for Fannie Mae. You all remember them, right? They're the government-backed bank that caused the economic crash of 2007. He was lobbying for them when Republicans wanted more oversight and regulation for Fannie Mae, and Democrats stopped it from happening. That's right, Democrats were against regulating the banks. I know that doesn't fit very well with the liberal narrative, so here's a little bit of evidence for you.
They claim to be free market advocates when it's really an anything goes mentality. No regulation, no supervision, no discipline.
In addition to our important oversight role in this committee, I hope that we will move swiftly to create a new regulatory structure for Fannie Mae, for Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Bank.
It is indeed a very troubling report, but it is a report of extraordinary importance, not only to those who wish to own a home, but as to the taxpayers of this country who would pay the cost of the cleanup of an enterprise failure.
And we heard the Secretary and the Chairman tell us that this was a once-in-100-year phenomenon. And how did it sneak up on us so silently, almost on little cat's feet?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have a crisis at Freddie Mac, and in particular at Fannie Mae, under the outstanding leadership of Mr. Frank Raines.
There's been nothing that was indicated that's wrong, with Fannie Mae. Freddie Mac has come up on its own, and the question that then presents is the competence that your agency has.
So the unelected bureaucrat, who's essentially President Swamp Monster, was a lobbyist for Fannie Mae when those hearings were taking place. Presumably, the bank was paying him a lot of money to convince Democrats that there was nothing to worry about. And that led to the economic crash of 2007. A crash that Democrats still pretend was somehow George Bush's fault. And with the media on their side, they're great at making narratives stick. But I'm afraid the narrative around Biden being mentally fit is slowly falling apart. Behind the scenes in Washington, they know he's not really in charge. But that doesn't stop the media from trying to spin it. I read a few articles where they tried to paint it as Biden just being really good at delegating work. I'm sorry, but a president who answers to his staff is not delegating work. He's not doing the work. He's a puppet. Another spin was that he used to have a stutter. Maybe he did, but if you look at an old video like this one from 1987, why don't we see a hint of it?
I began to think that about 10 months ago, as the national press started to talk about Biden being a presidential contender, and the fact that I was always put in this first tier of candidates as a contender, I began to think, well, maybe I've really started to rise. Maybe things are really starting to move for me.
Are we supposed to believe that he was able to get rid of his stutter for the 47 years he worked in government, only for it to come back in his late 70s when his dream of becoming president was finally achieved or granted? The fact is, Joe Biden is not in charge. He can't be, or he would never be worried about getting in trouble with his staff. If he was mentally fit, he definitely would not tell anyone he was worried about getting in trouble with his staff. Politicians pretty much place optics above all else, and the most powerful man in the world telling us he answers to someone else is about as bad as it gets. Just think about the pep talk that must take place before Joe goes out in front of reporters. Okay, Joe, on this card is the list of people you're going to call on for questions. On this card are the answers to the questions they're going to ask. And look at me, Joe. After you answer those questions, do not take any more questions. You hear me? And if you can get through this, we'll stop by the kitchen and get you some ice cream on the way back to the Oval Office. 2 scoops, just like Trump got, okay? Now, go get 'em, champ. There is no way that a career politician whose lifelong dream has been to become the president would let anyone tell him what he can and can't do, unless he doesn't trust his own ability to think and make decisions. And I'm afraid that's where we are. Joe Biden may have the title of president, but he definitely ain't in charge. And that's the simple truth. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you all would like to support this channel, check out the links in the description, and let's keep putting some common sense back into the great debate.